My American story started when I was born. I was born in Germany. My father was a young officer in the US Allied occupation in Germany, and they were at that time allowing wives and young families to go be part of the occupation. And so my parents, who both grew up in small towns in Tennessee, found themselves in post-war Germany. And as a very young child, of course, my mother told me stories, because when we came back from Germany, I was only 18 months old, and I had some German words from a nanny, but mother told me stories. And one of the stories that moved me the most was that the military commandeered people's homes for us to live in. They just made people move out so that we could live there. It was part of the occupation of the war. And mother had many stories of trying to let the woman who owned the house still live there to watch over her house, and how hard it all was, and how the decisions that she had to make about helping people. And so from a very young age, I was very aware of being an American and being having been in a different country, and having to feel that interface between cultures and countries, and that had to do with the war and belief systems and things. And my American story has carried on from there, interfacing with different cultures and exploring inwardly what it means to be an American. America is a wonderful ideal, and we're still finding it. We're still learning what that is and how that works, because America has some very complex and difficult beginnings, and still with bringing this ideal into the world.
My American story began in my youth, before I even realized my calling, as I left home and I joined the Navy. And then I came back pretty much of a wild and crazy guy. And there were some things that happened in my life that wasn't really that positive, and got in a little trouble. But I decided then that I would try to be a good person and pay my debt back to society. And with that, I thought that I would participate in things in my community. And of course, that was sports. And so I began to coach youth sports, football, basketball, and anything that would occupy my time. And later on, I began to run leagues and just participate in my community. And it really made me feel good. But in my work, things kind of changed, and I joined a labor union. And when I joined that labor union, my eyes pretty much were open to what unions do and how it would be beneficial to me. As a person of color coming out of Jim Crow and just coming into the manufacturing workforce in the early 70s, it was pretty difficult. But with that, working under a union contract, it was good to know that a union contract is not a respecter of person. It's not based on who you go to church with, who you play ball with, or who you date, or how much you really build a relationship with a supervisor. A union contract allows you to train and make yourself a suitable applicant so that you can advance. And people of color have really prospered through labor unions. And that kind of catapulted me in life. And one of the main ingredients that I got out of that was activism. it brought me along. It opened my eyes to social and economic and racial justice. And so my American story is that during for such a time as that, I was able to prosper through labor unions to get me where I'm at today, to use the platform that I'm on to be an activist and to promote social and economic justice for Black folks and people, indigenous people of color in my community. And that's my American story.
My American story began really with my parents. My mom immigrated to the US many decades ago, and my dad came here for graduate school to pursue his master's and PhD. So I'm a first generation Indian American, and I'm really proud of my upbringing. I'm very fortunate to have gotten a lot of my Indian culture and heritage while growing up, while also being raised in America, where I have so many opportunities, and frankly, a lot more opportunities than many other people my age in perhaps India or places like that.
My American story began when I came to the US with a scholarship to go to college when I was 18. I went to a university in upstate New York, in New Paltz, New York. And then I moved on to New York City. I started working as a chemist, and I went to school at night, got an MBA degree. And those skills and the affinity to be good to people gave me a lot of opportunities. I worked in wonderful companies in the US, and I led some large businesses that gave me the opportunity to live all over the US, in the Midwest, on the East Coast, on the West Coast, the South, and also overseas. But the US is the land of opportunity and a wonderful place to live and grow as a person and professionally. And here we are again in Tennessee.
My American story began in Cleveland, Tennessee, where I was born, Hope Lenore Bradford. And I was given up for adoption. And thank the good Lord that I was adopted by Robert and Edith Garrett, who were my adopted parents who raised me. Wow. Real good childhood. I mean, I wasn't a straight A student, but I made decent grades in school. Got in trouble a little bit when I got older, but graduated high school. But before I graduated, I lost my dad when I was a senior, day before Thanksgiving. So that was a major event in my life. After I graduated, went to work in factory. That's what it was back then, in Salina. And got in trouble with drugs, alcohol. And I'd already had my children then. So I went to treatment the first time, and it didn't work, it just didn't, and I went back out. So when I went to treatment the second time, I was ready. I couldn't look in the mirror and love that person. And I had three choices. It was to clean up, die, or go to jail. And so I went to treatment because I wanted to this time, and that's been 20 years ago. So had to blend back a lot with my children, because I lost a lot of valuable time with them when I was in addiction. But we're good. I have two beautiful grandchildren, one due this month, hopefully. So I'm all excited. And I've just worked in factories once, of course, they went overseas. And then I worked construction after I got out of college the first time. And I loved it. Loved the outdoors. Loved seeing something new every day. I mean, I would go back if I had retirement. But so I had to get smart, and I was getting older too. So I went to work at UCHRA, which has been awesome. I mean, I started as a janitor. And then I worked my way to the front desk. And I stayed on the front desk probably a year and a half. And then I moved into nutrition, Meals on Wheels, and that was wonderful. I mean, being able to go out and take a meal to someone that's probably their only hot meal per day. Yeah, really self-fulfilling for me because I've always wanted to help people. And 2.5 years ago, I had an opportunity to move into the Ryan White program. and that's working with people who have HIV. And that has been wonderful. Just to brighten their day, to make them smile, because I can't help but smile, you know, and bring out the good. And I love people. I'm a people person. And that's one thing my dad taught me, to never meet a stranger. And I've tried to live by that all my life. So, and it's served me pretty well.
My American story began, I would say, when I was very young. And I was born in the US. And when I was quite young, my family moved to Canada. And my American story began when I moved from Canada back to the United States. We'd been living in the capital city of Canada, Ottawa, and we'd been living in a section of town that was pretty international. A lot of the embassies were close by, and people of all nations lived kind of all around us. And we went to school with kids at a fairly international school. And then I was just beginning, I guess, second grade, and we moved to Montgomery, Alabama, which was really different. And George Wallace was the governor, and he believed in segregation now and segregation forever, as he's famously remembered for. And then just 2 or 3 months after we moved to Alabama, the church was bombed and the little girls were murdered. And I remember it just galvanized me as a little kid, realizing that other little kids were being murdered because they didn't have the same color skin as I did. And when Kennedy was shot that year, there was people in our class that applauded that. And somebody carved in the desk in the library in honor of Lee Harvey Oswald, who did our nation a great service. And they left it there. And I'll just never forget how upside down that felt and how wrong it felt. And that was my first really major sort of sentient years of, and I just couldn't understand it at all. Then we moved to Colorado, and I realized that some of that same sort of feeling persisted in Colorado, only it wasn't for Black people, it was for Latino people. And I still couldn't understand that. It just didn't make any sense to me at all. When the rest of my world as an American couldn't have been better, couldn't have been more wonderful, couldn't have been more nurtured and nurturing, and in my family life and education and young life. But there was this thing that existed that still to this day exists, and still to this day I just don't comprehend it.
Oh, my American story began, I guess, the day I took the flight to United States in 2000, August 11th. And I had no idea what to expect because I was never a TV person. My dad never believed in having all these Star Plus English channels at home. So I did learn English. I did speak maybe a little bit. I was able to understand, but mostly British accent. So I came here not knowing what to expect, and I landed in Chicago airport, and our distant relatives came to pick us up and took us to their place. And the next day I had to say goodbye to my husband and go all alone to Utah State University, because I came here as a student to pursue my PhD. And so one day after that, like after I landed, I just separated from my one and only person that I knew until then, and then just went on to take on this new journey at Utah State University. So that's where my American life began. But then my husband lived in Missouri. Then from there we went to Illinois. From there he moved to New York. And during all these 3 years, I finished my PhD in Utah and joined him in New York. And then from there, he went to Texas to pursue bone marrow transplant. So I didn't go, but I just went and visited him. But I lived in New York, and then we finally moved to Tennessee. So it's a pretty long journey, and we've been to several places along the journey. And we actually visited all 50 states